very sorry. Take two. Um, the, I am John Mann, Director of Education for Lakeside. The theme week for this week, of course, is the common good, and I'd like to welcome Rachel Gardner. Rachel is the Director of Victim Services at the YWCA of Northwest Ohio, and in this role, she is responsible for ensuring services to domestic and sexual violence survivors are trauma-informed, supportive, and loving. She holds a master's and bachelor's in social work and is a licensed independent social worker in the state of Ohio. Her staff have said she is a quiet tsunami and that she is their favorite Rachel. And today's session is why we have to stop asking why survivors stay. The most common question an advocate is asked is, why did she stay? And this workshop is designed to take the question from why does she stay to why don't they stop? I do ask if you please mute your cell phone ringers and help me in welcoming Rachel to Lakeside.
Thank you. It sounds like I'm on. Am I coming in clear? Beautiful. So as John said, my name is Rachel. I work at the YWCA of Northwest Ohio, so I trekked in from Toledo. Some spots on the drive-in are raining cats and dogs, but nothing too bad. But I don't know if there's some heavier rain headed this way, because there was some definitely heavy downpour spots. I have a blended family. I've got 5 kids between my husband and I, 3 boys who still live at home, all of them teenagers, so you may hear me say things like bruh, because I live with all teenagers, and it has infiltrated my language. I also like for folks to know that I have ADHD, and so I will probably move around, and then I have a couple of clips that I'm going to use because I cannot pay attention to myself for as long as we are scheduled for. I can't even stay on track that long. So I tend to have just a pretty relaxed vibe. We'll have some video clips in here as well too, and then I'm going to be talking about domestic violence, so consider that your content warning. The title is your content warning. That's what we're going to be talking about. So I anticipate that that is enough of one. I think that's all I wanted to say. Like I said, I got ADHD, so I'm just thinking, was that all I wanted to say? I think so. We'll get started. If I remember, I'll come back. Okay, so we're going to be doing kind of this like DV 101. I want to think about this session as walking through a relationship from start to end that ends up being an abusive relationship. So that's the framework that I'm operating from today is let's walk through a relationship. Let's go through the timeline. Let's take a look at what happens. And then let's ask ourselves some of those questions. And hopefully by the end, we're really flipping that question to why doesn't domestic violence stop instead of really feeling that confusion that folks tend to feel around why someone would stay. Why someone would be in a relationship, why someone would even be involved with someone who uses abusive tactics. Because tends to be that community members often tell me they can never imagine being with someone who's abusive. They can never imagine being in that situation. They would just pull out their frying pan. And so I want to kind of walk through this framework today of how situations and how relationships get to that point, and then what are the exit strategies and what are the roadblocks to those strategies as well too. Okay, so first I want to make sure that the groundwork is that framework, and that framework is that nobody asks to be abused. Nobody wears signs either that says, we're going to get into a relationship together and I'm going to end up being abusive to you. Nobody wears that sign on their forehead. I would have no job if it were that easy, that people wore a t-shirt that they picked up at Costco and it was like, you know, here's the section, men's and women's and juniors, and the section for people that are going to be abusive. And they just picked up the t-shirt. It'd be so much easier. And nobody tends to think that they will be abused. Like I said, most of the time when I talk to community members, they cannot imagine being in a situation that ends up abusive. So I'm also, I do remember what I was going to say. 99% of the folks that I work with are women. So my framework also is very female-oriented, as women as the survivors, and typically working with those women who are being abused by someone who identifies as male. Now, I work with folks outside of that spectrum. I work with folks from LGBTQ community. I work with folks who are transgender. I work with folks who are identify as male and come in for services because they are being abused by someone who is a woman. But 99% of the folks that I work with are women, identify as women. So that will largely be my framework. So I do want to, say that I know that abuse happens outside of that framework, but most of the folks that I work with are within that framework. Okay, so thinking about how an abusive relationship starts. I have here Nick Nolte, who, this is his, Nick Nolte was arrested for DUI, and this is his mugshot from when he was arrested for that DUI. And this picture to me was like, this is how people kind of imagine someone who is going to be abusive. They picture kind of wild-eyed, kind of grungy, just this wild mane, that there is an expectation that folks that use abuse are really angry all the time, that abuse is really an anger problem, and abuse is not an anger problem, but there is an expectation that, like, that's who someone that uses abuse is. They're angry all the time, that they're violent all the time, they can't keep jobs, they blow up at people, they're hollering in the store, they're the people that end up on World Star or some of those videos, where they're going off on the gate agent and just having an epic meltdown in the airport. That's the kind of person that is abusive, that you can really spot them. So when I saw this, I just imagined this person that most folks imagine, that are kind of wild-eyed and kind of come up and they're like, do you want to go out with me? You want to be my girlfriend? And that it'd be like, of course, anybody would say no, I don't want to go out with you, Nick Nolte. Often folks think that folks that use abuse tactics are going to be broke, busted, alcoholic, drug dependent. They're going to be the TLC song, No Scrubs. I don't want no scrubs. They're really not going to be worth a second look. But what I hear from survivors is this. This is also Nick Nolte. That they were with someone who they would really describe as very sweet, especially in the beginning. They were protective, they were handsome, they were influential, they have a good job. They have a job in the community where they really thought nobody's gonna believe that this is happening with this person. They presented very fearless, very smart, very intuitive as well too. They could really read me, they could really be in tune with me, they listened to me. So who we hear from survivors, that the person that they fell in love with is not the person that then begins to use those tactics to get abusive with them. And one of the things that I really remember, I was talking with a young lady who had come into our shelter, and she said, I just want my best friend back. Because that's who they had been. They had been friends first, then they started dating, then the abuse started infiltrating, and by the time that she left, it had gotten physical. But that's what she said. She was so sad about this relationship ending because she said, I just want my best friend back. I wish I could just have that back. So this is the folks that our survivors fall in love with. They fall in love with 1970s Nick Nolte. One of the tactics that in the beginning of this relationship that can often be overlooked as a red flag is what we call love bombing. So love bombing is an early abuse tactic to manipulate someone into the relationship. because often there are red flags, but they can be really difficult to spot. So love bombing is one of them. So what is love bombing? It's really a manipulation tool, and it can look like too much flattery, too excessive of love, too over-the-top gifts. And so this can be a hard red flag because people are like, how can too much flattery be a red flag? How can someone professing that they care about you be this red flag? How does that work? But the purpose is that this person is manipulating to get that person they're trying to get in a relationship with, to get them in the relationship, to push at their boundaries around texting and calling and time management, their physical boundaries with being intimate in their intimacy. And then because they're really getting a lot of time and attention from that person, which is releasing, like for the survivor, it's releasing like all these endorphins in their mind, and it's like, it feels good to be flattered. So it's feeling really nice to get this attention. It's feeling really nice to get this flattery. Who doesn't like presents? If you guys all came up and gave me presents right now, I would accept them all. So it's nice to get gifts and presents. And over here we have what some of it can sound like, though, because love bombing is the over the top. Not, I like you and you're a cool person, but the over the top. It's you and me forever, right? On our third date. I've never met anybody like you. I feel like I can tell you anything. I want to know more about you. Tell me more about you. And the goal there is to get you to disclose things. Tell me your secrets. Tell me about your childhood. Tell me about your past, so that I have information on you. When we have kids, or maybe a first time out on a date, you run into a friend, this is my future wife, this is my future husband. It's, again, we were talking about like third date, fourth date, something like that. I just want to be with you all the time. I miss you when you're gone. Text me when you get home. Call me when you get up. Call me when you get to work. Call me when you leave. Cancel your plans for Saturday night because I'm taking you out. Cancel your plans for Sunday because we're going to brunch. Clear your schedule this weekend. I'm taking you away, and we're going to go on a getaway. But what love bombing is all of those things are, I'm dictating to you what we're going to do and when we're going to go and how you're going to get there. And it can feel really good, but it's really manipulative. Okay, so this movie, I got my first clip here for us. This movie is from 1996. It's called Fear. Has anybody seen it? Nope? Okay. So, in the movie, we have a young Reese Witherspoon, who is just a doll and a half. And I think she plays a character named Nicole. And we have a young Mark Wahlberg, who is a hunk of a hunk. And he plays a young man named David. And Nicole, in our movie, I think that's her name, our young Reese Witherspoon is she's about 17, 18. They're in a young dating relationship. They've seen each other across the football field, or at school, or in the neighborhood, but here they've gone on kind of their first or second date. This is very early in getting to know each other. And so we're going to see how David approaches Nicole.
What?
Nothing?
There was nothing going on behind those beautiful eyes of yours. Tell me.
I was just thinking that, you're not at all like what I expect you to be the first time I saw you.
How so?
I don't know, you're sweet. But you're the one that's hiding something.
It's just that I was taught that if something seems too good to be true, then it probably isn't.
Yeah.
So far, what I know about you is you're beautiful. You're incredibly perceptive. You just need to know like one flaw so I can believe the rest.
Get a week.
I got all the time in the world.
David, I gotta go. My curfew's at midnight.
All the time in the world.
It doesn't get spicier than kissing, I promise.
David. I'm sorry. I guess you found my flaw.
That's not a flaw. It's one more perfect thing for me to admire and respect and wait for.
Okay, so we saw the flattery, right? We saw that he's handsome, she's sweet, you're perfect. We saw him behaving in a, trying to behave in a, or perceiving to behave, sorry, one of my kids. Perceiving to behave in a way, oh, it's one more thing for me to respect, that's one more thing for me to wait for, but we saw the boundary pushing too as well, right? Setting that clock back for 30 minutes. Tell your parents and I think he said, tell your parents that your watch is running late. Tell your parents that your watch broke. So testing the boundaries, testing the physical boundaries as well too, but then backing off. And with this, with love bombing, how could you get mad at me for wanting to spend more time with you? How could you get mad at me because I like you so much? How could you get mad at me because I think you're so wonderful? When the person who really will later become the survivor goes to set those boundaries, that can be where they see some of those red flags as well too, because it becomes blaming, they can get hostile, but they can get manipulative as well too. Someone can get manipulative because it's like, well, how could you be mad at me because I think you're so great? And that becomes difficult to argue. And then it can be further. You're just being really sensitive. I'm not like your exes. Don't hold that against me. Don't hold your past relationship against me. I just want to love you. That's a difficult thing to hold up my defenses around, because it does turn the tables and get someone thinking, am I tripping? Is it you or is it me? Hell, it might be me. Maybe I am tripping. Maybe I am holding something against you. That's the point. Has anybody ever seen a power and control wheel? Okay, I see a yes, okay, but I see mostly no's. This is at the heart of what we look at when we see a relationship become abusive. We call it the power and control wheel. It is developed out of Missouri. It's the Duluth model. At the heart of it is tactics that are purposeful to get at power and control. Just like love bombing is a purposeful tactic to give a little push-pull, to give a little getting you invested in this relationship, but it really is a manipulation tactic. Power and control is about manipulation. At the center is one person wanting to have the power and the control in the relationship over another person. All the spokes, like a bicycle, are the different tactics that as an advocate I see someone use to get at power and control. Isolation, minimize, deny, blame. I didn't do that. You're blowing that out of proportion. If I did do that, it was not that bad. I never hit you. I might have pushed you, but I never hit you. Don't say that. And blaming, if it was that bad, you pushed me there. You knew I had a long day at work. You knew I stopped at the bar. I wasn't thinking because I had a couple of drinks. Using kids, using privilege as well too, making all the decisions, being the one to define the roles, getting very upset if the other person in the relationship steps outside what is perceived as the defined role. Economic abuse is job stuff. I'll go into that a little bit later. Coercion and threats. Coercion and threats are a tough one because I use this example. If I am abusive towards someone in a relationship, I never have to threaten their life necessarily. But if I use name calling and I use put downs and I complain about their family and I've got them isolated and I carry a weapon and I keep one on my hip and I keep one in my car and I keep one in my bedside drawer, I don't have to threaten you because you know I can. So that's a very difficult one for people to, when they're trying to describe what's happening to them, for them to be able to pin down and put their finger on. How do you describe to a police officer a look that you know what it means? Or that they legally carry a weapon everywhere and you're afraid that it'll be used against you? Especially if they've never said it. It's tough to pin down. Same thing for on that intimidation. If I never hit you, but I punch the cabinet next to you, if I never hit you, but I break your stuff, key your car, or just lose my temper, but you know I would never hurt you. I lost my temper, but you know I would never hurt you. Put downs, and all of that around the outside is the use or the threat of physical and sexual violence. So we're in this relationship. Remember, our framework is kind of walking through this relationship. So we've met somebody, and we've gotten into this relationship, and they are sweet, and they are charming, and they have a good job, and they buy me presents, and they've taken me on dates, and I'm pretty invested in the relationship. And there's some stuff that I was uncomfortable with, but everybody has their baggage, and nobody's perfect, and I probably was blowing it up. I was tripping a little bit. I really like this person. So now I'm in the relationship. Maybe I've moved in, maybe I haven't, but I'm in the relationship. So often this is how abuse begins. The person is invested in the relationship, you have an emotional attachment, you have skin in the game, and then things start to change. And usually they start to change with emotional abuse and isolation. That is the most common tactic that we see folks start to use to really begin an abuse cycle. Things like going out to meet friends for a drink. How does this look, honey? That outfit looks good considering you put on some weight. Wait, what? Oh, don't you know how to take a compliment? I'm saying it looks nice on you. Or you want to spend time with your friends. Hey, you know what? We spent the last 3 weekends together. I'm going to see the girls this weekend. I cannot believe you would ditch me for your friends. You know I had plans for us this weekend. Why would you go out with them? They don't like me anyways, and every time you go out with them, you come back with the attitude. I can't stand when you go out with them. They put all these crazy ideas in your head. I just know it's going to be hell. Fine, you do you. You want to leave me? You go ahead. Have fun. Then say I do hold my boundary. What do I get? Often the silent treatment. The slamming of the doors, the stomping of the stairs, slamming something down in the kitchen. The stuff that's hard to pin down, but you know the vibe is off. And anybody that's married in here knows when the vibe is off. I know when my husband has an attitude, even if he doesn't say anything. I am a happily married woman. But I know when that man has an attitude. Honey, what's going on? Nothing. You don't have anything you want to talk about? No. Let the Steelers lose in my household. My husband just had his birthday. I bought him the NFL Sunday ticket for his birthday present. Let me tell y'all why. Because last year he didn't have it, and he got on my every last nerve. An attitude every Sunday. If it wasn't on the local channel, he was trying to find it. He was trying to, go to B-dubs or watch the game or something like that. The whole thing was such a pain in the butt. So we all know, even in relationships where we're happily married, we know when the vibe is off. But this is that purposeful, the stomping, the slamming, the looks, the gestures. And as Kermit has here, this is the attitude. What are you talking about? I'm innocent until you prove me guilty. I don't know what you mean. You're tripping. You need to see a counselor. You need to get on some meds. You're always making something out of nothing. You always want to pin me as the bad guy. I don't know why you want me to be the bad guy so bad. All I'm trying to do is love you. Once that person starts to effectively bring down the person they're in that relationship with the put downs, with the isolation, with the, I must be tripping. Is it me or is it them? It might be me. I mean, I got some baggage. It's probably me. Other abuse tactics can be introduced. For example, financial abuse is the big one. We see a lot of financial abuse from our survivors. And most people would say, if you mess up my bag, my money, of course I'm not going to be in a relationship. But it can look like calling your work to check on you, calling nonstop, interrupting your day 5 times, making you late, interrupting your work, fussing about you having a job. What do you need to work for? I make enough money for the 2 of us. You can give up that little job. You know you don't really need that. You don't trust me to take care of you? It can also be refusing to work, refusing to contribute to the household. It can be taking the money, refusing, look at that, refusing to let their partner work is cut off. Sorry about that. Controlling money as well too. And to bring a little levity, because our topic is heavy. Our cartoon says, you're keeping up with the Joneses. I had to move them out yesterday. So financial abuse is a way to increase that dependency. So then what I can do if I'm abusive is I can take and I can layer my tactics. I can layer my tactics. I may have isolated you, I've cut you off from some of your friends. Even if you do go out with them or you're in contact with them, I make it kind of a big deal so that it becomes more of a pain to go out with the girls than it does to just go ahead and stay home with boo. I'm complaining about you working, or when you do have work, I'm calling the job every other day. Why would you get mad at me about that? I'm just checking on you. I just want to make sure that you're safe. I just need to know where the Tupperware is. The kids spit up and I didn't know what to do. I'm calling about your baby that I'm watching for you so you can work. And as I layer those things, then you can begin to introduce physical and sexual violence. A push, an argument, a hard grab, throwing something, hitting a wall. Abuse typically doesn't start with being physically violent to another person's body. It starts with the violence around them. And then I can direct it towards who I want to direct it at. But in relationships, we also have to look at there's a cycle, because once abuse tactics are introduced, it doesn't stay that way all the time. It's not like we cross a certain line and now I'm abusive all the time if I use those tactics, because that would make leaving easy. That would make leaving sensible. So I'm not going to be that way all the time. Nothing is that way all the time, but there is a predictable cycle to it. This is the cycle of abuse. We have what oftentimes in literature is called this honeymoon phase, this big half of the circle. Survivors I know don't like to call it the honeymoon phase. Usually by the time that they come to our emergency shelter, the honeymoon phase has gotten so short and so brief and isn't very honeymoony, whereas the violence stage is so much longer. They just don't identify well with that. So I like to call it kind of the green phase. This is where after something, I return to the person that you fell in love with. I return to the best friend that survivor wanted to be. I'm supportive. Maybe I make counseling appointments. Maybe if I do have a dependency issue, I stop drinking or I start going to AA or NA. I'm working. I show a healthy and supportive and loving side, the side that in the beginning you were charmed by, you fell in love with. I was sweet and smart and intuitive and gentle and kind. and all the things that you're looking for. The tension building phase is the phase where it's hard to describe. It's like I said, it's that somebody comes home from work and you can hear the footsteps on the stairs and you know that's not their usual walk. That's how I've heard it described. You know it's not going to be a good night. They're coming in with an attitude. Oftentimes in the tension building phase, what we see is it looks like nitpicking. The person that uses abuse is like picking at and looking for a reason to start a fight or get violence, and the person who's being abused is trying to really keep the peace. So maybe they cancel plans, maybe they come home early, maybe they take a couple days off work, make a favorite dinner, do things to try to keep the peace. And then in the violence phase, that's where we see our domestic and physical violence happening. That can be a coercive sexual encounter. That can be a physical violence episode. But it's violent. Now, the more times, the thing about this cycle is the more times somebody goes around it, the shorter the honeymoon period gets, the longer the violent period gets, and your exit strategies, which we'll talk about leaving, your exit strategies essentially become 3 exits. Suicide. About 24% of survivors will kill themselves to get out of the relationship. Leave, which has its own dangers. Die, because that's the ultimate end of the abuse cycle. It's fatality. We're going to come back to Nicole and David. So in this clip, Nicole has a friend named Gary. And David has seen Gary talking to Nicole and joking and kind of taps her on the arm or touched her arm or something like that. And David went over and beat Gary up. And Nicole cut David off. So that's the background. There's been no physical violence towards Nicole, but Nicole has now seen David get violent towards Gary, and he beat up her friend, cut him off. She's not talking to him. And we're going to see how David responds to Nicole.
Nicole, just give me 1 minute. Listen, I know you don't want to see me again, but I still have to explain. There's nothing that I can say will make what I did all right. I know that, but I need you to know that it came from someplace good. It came from me feeling like I'd do anything to protect you.
From Gary?
I didn't know it was Gary. I swear, all I saw was some guy with his paws all over you. And knowing how many bad guys are out there, guys that would take advantage of somebody like you. Guys that I would kill if they ever did anything to hurt you. I just lost it. But I want you to know that I'm very sorry about what happened to Gary. I am. But I can't be sorry that I love you. I learned from you, Nicole. I really did. I learned that I need people more than I thought. I've always been the one taking care of things. And with you, it's different. I want us to take care of each other. And I promise nothing like that will ever happen again. I'm sorry.
That's what it's like. That's a good depiction of what it's like. It's so sincere. And remember that person that I talked about in the beginning that was love bombing, but how would I put defenses against like flattery too much? Oh, they love me too much, too fast. Oh, like how do I defend that? which really is a red flag, too much, too fast. That was it seemed so genuine, it was so sweet, and that's what it's like when folks return. And then if you layer on top of that kids, I just want us to be a family. We have kids together. Let me be a parent to them. And you're thinking about breaking up a family or leaving, it's a big decision. So it can become one that is, why folks are like, why would I leave? I'm tripping. It's gonna change. We're gonna get counseling. We're gonna get help. It was one time, it's gonna be different. So I talked about in that cycle how we have a couple of exits, none of them really very favorable, but 2 of them are fatal. 1 isn't. In the event that we have someone that takes the exit, this idea around just leaving, I want to walk through a little bit, again, this framework. So we're in this relationship, we fell in love with somebody, but things changed, they got abusive. Now they're pretty bad. Now I don't really see the person I fell in love with anymore. Now I only see the person that's abusive. Maybe I have some kids, maybe I don't, but I make the decision, I'm out. I've hit my wall and I'm out, I'm gonna go. A lot of times what people hear though is, just leave them alone. I sat across from a mom once, her mom was with her. We were in a meeting. It was actually a meeting where her child was being removed because of the abuse that had happened towards her. And mom was gonna take the child, and child was going to reside with the parent full time. And that's what she said. You got to leave him alone. Just leave him alone. Just don't answer his calls. Just leave him alone. That is really about as helpful as telling somebody, stop breathing. If you have asthma and breathing is a difficulty for you, you should stop breathing. That will fix that for you. Just stop it. That is about how helpful that is. Let's talk about why. 1, leaving's just not always an option. This 8,194 survivors came from the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. They do a survey of the 77 DV programs in Ohio, and this was their finding, that 8,194 survivors last year were turned away from shelters because they were full. In Ottawa County, there is 1 shelter that serves Ottawa County. It is Safe Harbor. They serve Sandusky, Erie, and Ottawa County. They're in Sandusky County. There are 4 shelters in Northwest Ohio, considering like Lucas, looking at like Lucas Wood, the 4-county Henry Fulton, Defiance Wood. There's House of Ruth, which is like 5 beds. There's us, we're 46 beds, we're the biggest. And there's Cocoon, they got 20 beds. We're always full. So sometimes there's nowhere to go. And even if there is somewhere to go, how do you get there? When do you go? You gonna pack up your stuff and carry it out the door for somebody that's been punching you, kicking you, fighting you, threatening to kill you, strangling you, choking you, and say, I'm leaving, I'm gonna go ahead and go to a shelter? And then that's where you're gonna go? Because that's usually the option, is a shelter. We're in the middle of a renovation in our shelter. That building is crumbling around us. That is the truth of it. We can paint cinder block all day long. The walls are cinder block. So we're getting renovated, but if you came in today, your room will look like a jail cell. It will. And I've had people to come in and turn around and walk right back out because they say, I can't stay here. So I have no cartoon for this. Somewhere there's just nowhere to go. Number 2 is it's dangerous. Most of the time when a fatality does happen and someone is killed, they were leaving or they were planning to leave. Because what happens when somebody is leaving is they begin to take their power back and their control back. And if I'm willing to hurt you to have power and control over you, it ain't too far of a stretch that I'm willing to kill you. This is Fatalities, that same network, Ohio Domestic Violence Network. In October, they release a fatality report. Every October, because October is DV Awareness Month, and so they run it on a fiscal year. That's a fiscal year for us, July 1st to June 30th. And they run it on that instead of a calendar year so that they can release it in October. And so this is the most recent report. There were 90 adults in Ohio and 22 children under the age of 18 that were killed in domestic violence incidents. That is, for the second year, the highest. It's been 22 for 2 years now in a row, and that's the highest that it's been since they started doing this report, which I believe they've been doing for about 10 years. Several of these are also family annihilation cases, where a grandparent, the partner, and the children were killed. And when they interviewed loved ones, it was about 24%, 25%. They were planning to leave. They either had left, they were in shelter, they were at a friend's house, they were at a family member's house, or they were planning on it. They had started making their plans, and things seemed different, and they were killed. It also doesn't make it end. I have to take a little breath for a second. So Kelly Elliott, who you can look up the story on, this Preble County woman who lost 2 children, was in the Dayton Daily News. In 2022, she was at the press release for DV Awareness Month in Columbus with ODVN, and I went. And I'm sorry. Her story is so painful. She had separated from her spouse, and she had a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. And she had gone to the court. She had a guardian ad litem. They had been in a pretty long, drawn-out custody battle. And in her testimony that day, she talked about the guardian ad litem told her, the man you were married to is not the man that he is today. You have to give him a chance to be a father. And he had court-ordered visitation. And on his court-ordered visitation, he shot and killed their 2 kids and then himself. And they had been apart. She had gone to court. She had the guardian ad litem. She had the recommendation. She did all the things we say to do. And her kids were killed. Like I said, you can read her words herself, and there is a picture up of her children as well too. I didn't have her permission to put the picture up. It's on the internet, but I didn't have her permission to use it today, and I didn't feel right to share it. So I'm sharing just what I heard from her that day. So it just doesn't always end. It doesn't mean it's the end. We had someone once who came into shelter, and she was walking to the library. She had a baby, and she was carrying the baby. And the person that she had fled from saw her and jumped the curb to try to hit her with the car, and she threw the baby. She ended up with a children's services case for throwing the baby to try to avoid the baby being hit, which is wild to me. So even when people do all the right things, all the things that we think, well, this is what you need to do, it just doesn't mean that they're going to be safe. Oh, thank you for your grace with my emotions. Whew, let me compose myself. Okay, so if any of this resonates for somebody that you're worried about, Okay, so what are things that I would want you to know to look for? I'd want you to look for things like if their partner acts controlling, if they use put downs, if they seem jealous, if they make jokes, if they are very different when their partner is around, they seem quiet or very concerned about what their partner thinks, or even if they're talking, they're like, you can see that they're really checking in with their partner, like how are they responding to me, what's their attitude. Unexplained injuries, things just don't make sense, canceling plans, dressing different as well too. If they were, they say like if they're wearing long sleeves and 90 degrees, that can be a warning sign. Now, as again, someone who has teenagers, I don't know what that craze is right now, but I have teenagers who like that's the thing right now. They wear shorts or they wear pants and hoodies in 90 degrees. It's irritating my soul. But just these personality changes. And conversation starters are things like, I'm really concerned about the way I've seen so-and-so behave towards you. Would you be willing to hear me out? Would you be willing to talk with me? I've really noticed some changes since you guys started dating. Could we talk? If you ever wanted the number to an advocate, if you ever needed it, I've got it. I just have some concerns, so I just want you to know. If you ever needed it, I got it. It's really about, because remember, if we go back, the first thing that often starts the abuse cycle and continues throughout and only deepens is isolation. I can't tell anybody what's happening to me. So being available to break that, it usually feels like you're not doing anything, but you really are. What to do if somebody does disclose? Okay, so if you started a conversation and then somebody said, I was hoping somebody would ask, I've been waiting, or things aren't so great. One, listening without judgment. Folks that enter our services when they feel pressured to usually don't stay because it hasn't been their decision. It was to make somebody else happy and appease them. Safety planning with them. So I tell survivors things like bathrooms and kitchens are rooms that if violence is escalating, don't be in. Because a bathroom, there's only one way in and out, and a kitchen, you can have weaponry, things that turn into weaponry so readily. So bedrooms and living rooms, places where if you needed to get out a window, you needed to get out a door, you could. Plans for kids as well too. As advocates, we do a lot of planning around kids. Do you have a code word for kids? Do the kids know to go to a separate room without asking questions? Most often if kids are hurt, it's because they got in between, especially teenagers. They got in between and they tried to stop it. Just being informed. And I want to spend an extra second around strangulation because folks often don't know how serious strangulation is or how prevalent it is. So I want to spend a little bit of extra time around strangulation and how important it is to be seen by a medical professional. I thought that was me. I know you can't read that. This is my ADHD tracking my brain for things that we see. With strangulation, we often see, when we start the scalp, we often see hair loss because physical violence often includes dragging somebody by their hair. When I started in this work, it shocked me how often interrupting sleep and waking somebody up by jumping on them or dragging them out of bed by their hair was how common of a tactic that was. Drooping eyes. Petechiae is something that can happen around the ears, in the eyes especially, and in the mouth. What happens is, okay, I'm not a nurse, so I don't know if it's your jugular or your carotids. Whatever it is that brings the blood back from your brain is the first one to get cut off. Put your hands around someone's neck. And the pressure of the blood not being able to get out of the brain and out of the head ruptures the blood vessels, usually in very small dots or around the eye. That's called petechiae. It can be in the mouth, the ears are most common, and the eyes are most common. Drooping eyes as well too. Petechiae or bruising can also happen around the lips. Scratch marks. Usually there are not bruises. 9 times out of 10 there will not be bruises around the neck. Oftentimes only it's if there's ligature used, like rope or anything, but scratch marks, because I'm trying to get somebody's hands off my neck and end up scratching myself. A big one that we hear from folks is their throat hurts. Their voice is raspy. It hurts to talk. It hurts to swallow. And some of the biggest one and the most long-lasting is the neurological. Survivors of domestic violence experience more TBIs and brain injuries than NFL football players, primarily from concussions and strangulation. The neurological effects are devastating and long-lasting. Difficulty speaking, memory, headaches, mood difficulty regulating mood. The important thing to know about strangulation, it is often one of the biggest predictors of a fatality, and that because your internal structures here don't have anywhere to go except against bone when you are trying to get away, is it can cause small tears and ruptures in your jugular and in your carotid, and it can cause the soft tissue to swell to the point where even 72 hours later, it can swell shut and you cannot breathe. It is extremely, extremely fatal. In fact, if I take you through a timeline, this is a timeline of the physiological consequences of strangulation. So within 5 seconds, that's now, the person is unconscious. At 14 seconds, that's now, anorexic seizure. We're at 20 seconds, so we have loss of bladder control, petechiae, and loss of bowels. Loss of bowels is typically at 30 seconds. We're going to see respiration start to fail at about 1 minute. We're at 1 minute. And the person usually will stop all respirations and die at about 2 minutes. This red part in here where we get loss of consciousness, most folks don't know they lost consciousness. We often will see in a strangulation event that at the loss of consciousness or the voiding of the bowels, the person will let go and they come to. They don't know that they lost consciousness. That's 2 minutes. That quick. The last thing I want to share is from a woman named Leslie, who is a survivor who wrote a book, Crazy Love. She's got a TED Talk. It's my last piece that I want to share with you. Her TED Talk is maybe 15 minutes. And then if there's questions, then I'll be here for questions. I learned a lot. First time I watched her TED Talk, it was very insightful to me, and I learned a lot. So I'm hoping that, one, it wraps up with a survivor's voice herself, she does a TED Talk, she's clearly open to sharing, but I hope it feels insightful too.
I'm here today to talk about a disturbing question, which has an equally disturbing answer. My topic is the secrets of domestic violence. And the question I'm going to tackle is the one question everyone always asks. Why does she stay? Why would anyone stay with a man who beats her? I'm not a psychiatrist, a social worker, or an expert in domestic violence. I'm just one woman with a story to tell. I was 22. I had just graduated from Harvard College. I'd moved to New York City for my first job as a writer and editor at 17 magazine. I had my first apartment, my first little green American Express card, and I had a very big secret. My secret was that I had this gun loaded with hollow point bullets pointed at my head by the man who I thought was my soulmate many, many times. The man who I loved more than anybody on earth held a gun to my head and threatened to kill me more times than I can even remember. I'm here to tell you the story of crazy love, a psychological trap disguised as love, one that millions of women and even a few men fall into every year. It may even be your story. I don't look like a typical domestic violence survivor. I have a BA in English from Harvard College, an MBA in marketing from Wharton Business School. I spent most of my career working for Fortune 500 companies, including Johnson & Johnson, Leo Burnett, and the Washington Post. I've been married for almost 20 years to my second husband, and we have 3 kids together. My dog is a black lab, and I drive a Honda Odyssey minivan. So my first message for you is that domestic violence happens to everyone. All races, all religions, all income and education levels. It's everywhere. And my second message is that everyone thinks domestic violence happens to women, that it's a women's issue. Not exactly. Over 85% of abusers are men. And domestic abuse happens only in intimate, interdependent, long-term relationships. In other words, in families. The last place we would want or expect to find violence, which is one reason domestic abuse is so confusing. I would have told you myself that I was the last person on earth who would stay with a man who beats me. But in fact, I was a very typical victim because of my age. I was 22. And in the United States, women ages 16 to 24 are 3 times as likely to be domestic violence victims as women of other ages. And over 500 women and girls this age are killed every year by abusive partners, boyfriends and husbands in the United States. I was also a very typical victim because I knew nothing about domestic violence, its warning signs or its patterns. I met Connor on a cold, rainy January night. He sat next to me on the New York City subway, and he started chatting me up. He told me 2 things. One was that he, too, had just graduated from an Ivy League school, and that he worked at a very impressive Wall Street bank. But what made the biggest impression on me that first meeting was that he was smart and funny, and he looked like a farm boy. He had these big cheeks, these big apple cheeks, and this wheat blonde hair, and he seemed so sweet. One of the smartest things Connor did from the very beginning was to create the illusion that I was the dominant partner in the relationship. He did this, especially at the beginning, by idolizing me. We started dating, and he loved everything about me. That I was smart, that I'd gone to Harvard, that I was passionate about helping teenage girls and my job. He wanted to know everything about my family and my childhood, my hopes and dreams. Connor believed in me as a writer and a woman in a way that no one else ever had. And he also created a magical atmosphere of trust between us by confessing his secret, which was that as a very young boy, starting at age 4, he had been savagely and repeatedly physically abused by his stepfather. And the abuse had gotten so bad that he had had to drop out of school in 8th grade, even though he was very smart. And he'd spent almost 20 years rebuilding his life, which is why that Ivy League degree and the Wall Street job and his bright, shiny future meant so much to him. If you had told me that this smart, funny, sensitive man who adored me would one day dictate whether or not I wore makeup, how short my skirts were, where I lived, what jobs I took, who my friends were, and where I spent Christmas, I would have laughed at you. Because there was not a hint of violence or control or anger in Connor at the beginning. I didn't know that the first stage in any domestic violence relationship is to seduce and charm the victim. I also didn't know that the second step is to isolate the victim. Now, Connor did not come home one day and announce, hey, all this Romeo and Juliet stuff has been great, but I need to move into the next phase where I isolate you and I abuse you. So I need to get you out of this apartment where the neighbors can hear you scream and out of this city where you have friends and family and coworkers who can see the bruises. Instead, Connor came home one Friday evening and he told me that he had quit his job that day, his dream job. And he said that he had quit his job because of me, because I had made him feel so safe and loved that he didn't need to prove himself on Wall Street anymore. And he just wanted to get out of this city and away from his abusive, dysfunctional family and move to a tiny town in New England where he could start his life over with me by his side. Now, the last thing I wanted to do was leave New York and my dream job. But I thought you made sacrifices for your soulmate. So I agreed, and I quit my job, and Connor and I left Manhattan together. I had no idea I was falling into crazy love, that I was walking headfirst into a carefully laid physical, financial, and psychological trap. The next step in the domestic violence pattern is to introduce the threat of violence and see how she reacts. And here's where those guns come in. As soon as we moved to New England, that place where Connor was supposed to feel so safe, he bought 3 guns. He kept one in the glove compartment of our car. He kept one under the pillows on our bed. And the third one he kept in his pocket at all times. And he said that he needed those guns because of the trauma he'd experienced as a young boy. He needed them to feel protected. But those guns were really a message for me. And even though he hadn't raised a hand to me, my life was already in grave danger every minute of every day. Connor first physically attacked me 5 days before our wedding. It was 7 a.m. I still had on my nightgown. I was working on my computer trying to finish a freelance writing assignment, and I got frustrated. And Connor used my anger as an excuse to put both of his hands around my neck and to squeeze so tightly that I could not breathe or scream. And he used the chokehold to hit my head repeatedly against the wall. 5 days later, the 10 bruises on my neck had just faded, and I put on my mother's wedding dress, and I married him. Despite what had happened, I was sure we were going to live happily ever after, because I loved him, and he loved me so much. And he was very, very sorry. He had just been really stressed out by the wedding and by becoming a family with me. It was an isolated incident, and he was never going to hurt me again. It happened twice more on the honeymoon. The first time, I was driving to find a secret beach, and I got lost. And he punched me in the side of my head so hard that the other side of my head repeatedly hit the driver's side window. And then a few days later, driving home from our honeymoon, he got frustrated by traffic, and he threw a cold Big Mac in my face. Connor proceeded to beat me once or twice a week for the next 2.5 years of our marriage. I was mistaken in thinking that I was unique and alone in this situation. 1 in 3 American women experiences domestic violence or stalking at some point in her life. And the CDC reports that 15 million children are abused every year. 15 million. So actually, I was in very good company. Back to my question. Why did I stay? The answer is easy. I didn't know he was abusing me. Even though he held those loaded guns to my head, pushed me downstairs, threatened to kill our dog, pulled the key out of the car ignition as I drove down the highway, poured coffee grinds on my head as I dressed for a job interview. I never once thought of myself as a battered wife. Instead, I was a very strong woman in love with a deeply troubled man, and I was the only person on earth who could help Connor face his demons. The other question everybody asks is, why doesn't she just leave? Why didn't I walk out? I could have left any time. To me, this is the saddest and most painful question that people ask, because we victims know something you usually don't. It's incredibly dangerous to leave an abuser, because the final step in the domestic violence pattern is kill her. Over 70% of domestic violence murders happen after the victim has ended the relationship, after she's gotten out, because then the abuser has nothing left to lose. Other outcomes include long-term stalking, even after the abuser remarries, denial of financial resources, and manipulation of the family court system to terrify the victim and her children, who are regularly forced by family court judges to spend unsupervised time with the man who beat their mother. And still we ask, why doesn't she just leave? I was able to leave because of one final sadistic beating that broke through my denial. I realized that the man who I loved so much was going to kill me if I let him. So I broke the silence. I told everyone. The police, my neighbors, my friends and family, total strangers. And I'm here today because you all helped me. We tend to stereotype victims as grisly headlines, self-destructive women, damaged goods. The question, why does she stay, is code for some people for it's her fault for staying, as if victims intentionally choose to fall in love with men intent upon destroying us. But since publishing Crazy Love, I have heard hundreds of stories from men and women who also got out, who learned an invaluable life lesson from what happened, and who rebuilt lives, joyous, happy lives, as employees, wives, and mothers, lives completely free of violence. Like me, because it turns out that I'm actually a very typical domestic violence victim and a typical domestic violence survivor. I remarried a kind and gentle man. We have those 3 kids. I have that black lab, and I have that minivan. What I will never have again, ever, is a loaded gun held to my head by someone who says that he loves me. Now, right now, maybe you're thinking, wow, this is fascinating. Or, wow, how stupid was she? But this whole time, I've actually been talking about you. I promise you, there are several people listening to me right now who are currently being abused, or who were abused as children, or who are abusers themselves. Abuse could be affecting your daughter, your sister, your best friend right now. I was able to end my own crazy love story by breaking the silence. I'm still breaking the silence today. It's my way of helping other victims. And it's my final request of you. Talk about what you heard here. Abuse thrives only in silence. You have the power to end domestic violence simply by shining a spotlight on it. We victims need everyone. We need every one of you to understand the secrets of domestic violence. Show abuse the light of day by talking about it with your children, your coworkers, your friends and family. Recast survivors as wonderful, lovable people with full futures. Recognize the early signs of violence and conscientiously intervene, de-escalate it, show victims a safe way out. Together, we can make our beds, our dinner tables, and our families the safe and peaceful oases they should be. Thank you.
So my email address is here. I also wanted to put up, I mentioned that Safe Harbor is the local area provider serving Sandusky, Erie, and Ottawa County. I have their website. I also have their hotline as well, too. Not to be depressing, and not that I want everybody to walk out of here like, well, I'm not going to another one of John's sessions again. But there really is so much resilience in survivor community, and there really is so much that even if you think you don't know someone who is impacted by domestic violence, number one, you do. You may not know you know, but you do. Because if you know 4 women or 6 men, you know somebody. But there's also so much that can help folks rebuild their lives and their services. Things like at our shelter, when people call, I tell people things like, I don't have the grocery budget to buy candy and chips and ice cream. I can provide the basics, but I can't provide the stuff that we all have in our fridges that after a long day, like after listening to me talk about domestic violence, you may want to go home and have. Candy bars, chocolate, ice cream, bottled water, bleach. You know how much bleach we go through? Good Lord have mercy. Cleaning supplies. You pick up an extra pack of paper towels at a Costco when you go. That stuff is stuff that goes like wildfire. So just talking about it, thinking about it, sharing with someone that you heard about the YWCA today, that you went to a lecture on domestic violence, you learned something new, one thing that you did, or even just the next time that you're out, an extra bottle of bleach and dropping it off at your local provider or your local shelter. It doesn't have to be a DV shelter or a DV provider. We really, really need that help. And I would encourage everybody to also consider there's flexible things that we need, like volunteers. Many shelters use volunteers to answer hotlines, to return phone calls. We go out on hospital calls and we recruit volunteers to staff those hospital calls overnight and help us not entirely burn out like shiny 4th of July fireworks. But it really can be simple things like if you're out and you pick up an extra pack of paper towels and drop them off, that stuff is really appreciated. So that would be the last thing that I would want you to know, is that it was heavy today. I know I talked about such an unpopular topic, but there really is a place to, if you're inspired to be involved, to be involved. That's all I got. Questions? Anything felt like, wait a minute, go back to that, or I want to know more?
Thank you very much for that. That was very enlightening. Do you ever see cases of mutual abuse where there's two victims, essentially, and two
Yes.
perpetrators?
Yes. So the question was, do we ever see where there is mutual abuse? What I will tell you is we have had folks come in who I can't tell who the primary perpetrator is. So we have had folks that seem to be engaged in this combative relationship. They're both getting arrested. They're both throwing things. They're both hitting. That's not often. It is not typical. It is not often. I could probably count on one hand, maybe two. In the time that I've been at the YW, and I've been there since 2020, that I have really had somebody come in where I cannot tell whether or not they're perpetrating as well. In which case, we don't serve them. If I can't tell, because we are required by the Attorney General to be a victim service provider, we refer them out to other resources, but we will not bring them into our shelter. It's a great question. Yes, ma'am.
You do take children.
Yes, ma'am.
So you fill up really.
Yes, the question is, do we take children? We take everybody. So it used to be a myth that moms with boys over a certain age, the boys couldn't come in. That's not true. We take everybody. We take men, we take women, we take families, we take moms with kids and dads with kids. So our largest family had 7 kids this year. I think that might be the largest family that we've served. 7. We have a family with 5 kiddos in our shelter now. We typically have about 20 kids. So yeah, I smile at myself and say I'm a blue-collar girl through and through, because I'm used to holding the baby, or somebody spitting up, feet are stomping, baby's burping. Like, that's shelter, and that's like home for me. I call all the kids my best friend. Hey, best friend, where are you going today, best friend? But yeah, we do. And we have a child advocate. A lot of places don't, but we're lucky enough to have a really wonderful child advocate who helps with things like school enrollment, back to school supplies, and we try to take really good care of our school-age kids. Like, my philosophy is that, and we're blessed. Out of tragedy, we have a blessing. There is someone in our community who both of her children were killed, and she now has an endowment fund that she gives to us every year. We use that to be able to bring light to the philosophy that, like, a kid going to school shouldn't also have to wear their homelessness publicly. So they're getting new shoes, and they're getting new backpacks, and they're getting new outfits, and we're gonna send them out the door feeling fly. So we use it for things like that. Yes, sir.
What's the standard stay overnight in the shelter?
So the question is, what's the standard stay in the shelter? That varies by program in the state. There are some shelters who do not have time limits. We have 500 people come through our shelter every year, so we do have a time limit, because the catch is, do I let people stay longer and have to turn people away, or do I put in a time limit? And basically, I can get you safe, but I'm only a stepping stone. So for us, it's 60 days. The Cocoon, which is in Bowling Green, is 90. But the YWCA, like in Van Wert, they have a shelter as well too. They don't have a time limit. And in Toledo, there's Bethany House. Folks can stay there for up to 2 years. They're the only long-term shelter that we have. So they only accept referrals from like other advocates, and because they're long-term, they can stay there for 2 years. So it really depends on community, and we especially see longer stays in areas that are more rural, because housing is just so hard. That's a great question. Yeah, thanks.
Why are there so few beds?
Can I come back to you?
Oh, sure, sorry.
No, it's okay. There's someone behind you didn't see.
Oh, sorry. Thanks. I'm not sure yet what my question is, but just general. So love bombing. I think back to, Hollywood movies, even Disney movies. You, like the girl, like you want to be swept off your feet. You want the romance. So I'm really struggling with like, wow, what is great and romantic and nice and something that you would want to have versus where does it become love bombing?
Then you get it. That's what I would say is honestly, then you get part of the difficulty, especially when you're getting to know someone with identifying the red flags of how much is too much. So too fast, too intense, and what's my third one? Too much is kind of my bite of like red flag. Too much, too intense, too fast. But what does that look like for somebody who hasn't had great examples of healthy relationships? And yeah, how do you put up defenses against, again, like, I just want to spend time with you. Like, that's a really tough thing. And then we're doing more campaigning around like consent and how, so consent as I learned it is no means no. Now consent as we try to teach it is only yes means yes. Everything else is no. Silence is no. I'm not sure is no. I have all boys that live at home, and like I said, I have teenagers, so we're still talking about consent, and so they're like, oh my God, Mom, I know, because I still bring it like it's their dating, and like okay, like just giving this reminder, like if you're in this relationship, so my oldest is in a what I would call they've been dating for like a year, they feel serious about each other, and I guess I'll call it serious. So like, we're talking about like, did she seem comfortable? What did she say? Was she quiet? He's like, oh my God, Mom, I know, silence is no. This is him in the car. Silence is no. I'm not sure is no. I don't know is no. Can we slow down is no. Only yes is yes. I'm like, oh. Meanwhile, I'm like, yes, he remembered. So, yeah. That's not an answer, but that's the point. You get it. Okay, your question was.
Why so few beds?
Why so few beds? One is spaces that are purposed and used for shelters. So a lot of shelters will use houses because it's an affordable real estate option to be able to get, but that means that you're not going to have 100 beds. Metropolitan areas have more shelters, like in Columbus, they have a shelter that can house like 130. They have like 130 beds. But typically, if we're talking about bed space, the monies that are going to go for that are going to be HUD related, housing and urban development, and are going to go for homelessness. There is a smaller pot of money, especially for domestic violence. And then a lot of programs do non-residential, because how far can my dollars go if I don't have to put a live person on staff 24 hours a day, 365? A good portion of my cost at the shelter are payroll to have a live advocate so that anybody can walk in anytime and get an advocate, but that costs. So that's the other thing as well too, is that you'll see there's programs that they can't afford to go residential. They don't have the funding for it. And then most funding, like most grants, won't pay for things like capital. So it all has to go into direct service, and oftentimes it will only pay for direct service. So then who writes your grants? Because most grants actually won't pay for a grant writer. So one of our biggest grants, it's called VOCA, it's a Victim of Crime Act. It all has to go to direct service. Grant reporting and the grant writing and all the things that you have to do to show what you did with VOCA, you actually can't pay for out of VOCA. So all of that layers together to create little pots and high competition for the little pots. And so then even we see in some of our own communities, like, what you going for? What are you going to do with that money? Because I'm going to apply for it too, so we can work together or we can fight about it. So there's that too. Those are great questions.
Well, thank you very much, Rachel.
Thanks for
Thank you
having
very
me.
much.
Thank you. Thank you. It was nice to be here.